Okay, the tools needed are a narrow Torx T9 driver, a Phillips head screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, and needle nose pliers. When running the vacuum, it would stop. You'd fiddle around with the trigger. It would start back for a few seconds, stop, and you had to play with the trigger, and you get it start back, but only run for a few seconds. So I'm gonna show you guys how to replace the trigger on the Dyson V11 vacuum today. This specific model is the Dyson V11 torque drive vacuum. Okay, to get started, we're going to take these two screws off, and the one on the back of the frame and the handle to the battery. You need a Torx T9. Next, we're going to pull the battery off. There's the battery. Okay, we're going to take the filter off the back of the motor, unscrew it counterclockwise. Next, we're going to take the two screws off the frame here going into the canister. Alright, so we got those two screws out. Next, we got the 4 screws on the back of the body going into the canister. I'm going to take those out with a Phillips head screwdriver. There's the 4 screws. I like to keep them together. Next, we're going to take the canister off the body. There's where the 4 screws went through the body to the canister. Set that off the side. Next, we're going to take the 2 screws off the cover here. It's a Torx T9. We're going to pry the cover. At the top of each side, there's a locking tab about 10 and 2 o'clock. There's one of them. And there's the second one. That's where you want to get your flathead screwdriver underneath there and pry that cover up. Anytime prying on plastic, you want to be easy with it. Next, we're going to take the 2 screws off the power cables going to the circuit board. We're going to use a T9. Got those out, get them together. Next, we're going to take this communication cable off the circuit board. And it just comes straight off the board, straight up. I loosened it up with a little small flathead screwdriver and then just gently pulled it up with my fingers. Okay, now we're going to bend the power connections up to allow it to pass through the channel. And we're going to pull the motor out of the body. There's that little slot, the channel I was talking about on that motor. Next, we got 2 screws on this cover that's covering the electrical connectors. It's a Torx T9. We have a screw down in the handle. And it's going to be a Torx T9, but this screwdriver I was trying to use, the head was too fat on it. We can go down in with the handle to get to the screw. So I got T-handle Torx T9. That's what I'm using here. I'm going to get that screw out. It's a little tough to get to. It's deep in there, so you're going to need a long T9. And then I took a flathead screwdriver, pried up on the cover. Kind of jiggled around with it. I'm going to take your time with this part. There's 2 little tabs here on each side. And just be gentle with them. As you can see, it took me a minute to get it out of there. It's in there pretty good. and I just used that thicker flathead screwdriver and just pried, kind of twisted underneath it and worked it a little at a time and jiggled it. Eventually I was able to get it loose. As you can see here, just being gentle. We're prying on plastic. I'm gonna bend these terminals on these power cables up a little bit to get this cover through it. Alright, we'll get this cover off here. You can see from the bottom of it, it was tight in there. And I used my flathead screwdriver to kind of pry against the frame and the trigger to get the trigger to come out. On the frame of the trigger, there's a crack in it right here. And that's the culprit. That's why they felt like the trigger collapsed, didn't really have any tension on it, and it was acting up. So we're going to pull the spring loose from the trigger frame to the trigger body. And we're going to unhook the trigger from the body of the trigger. You can see here the crack in the trigger frame. Alright, so here's the new trigger. Got this one off of Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description. They look similar. And on the new trigger, they put a brace a little further down where the crack is on the Dyson trigger. From Dyson, you can buy the main body, but they don't sell the trigger. So like I said, this came from Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, right here I'm measuring the brace with a screwdriver, and I'm showing you guys how much longer it is and how it's improved over the Dyson original trigger. The new brace extends over the crack of the bad trigger. All right, so we're going to put a new trigger on. We're going to connect the spring back. Push the trigger over the frame. Clip it back in. And on the battery, it pushes up on the back of the frame of the trigger. Pushes the trigger out here. In the handle, there's a slot on each side where the trigger slides in. And it's keyed on the trigger on both sides. I was having a little trouble getting the wires back through the hole. All three of those wires as I was sliding the trigger up. I went and got the bread and stole the bread tie off of it, the twisted tie. And this worked pretty good. I'm sure everybody's got a loaf of bread laying around. Yes. All right, now we're gonna run this trigger in there and watch how easy the wires just come right on through. There it is. Check it out. Went right through there. I was fighting with it, came up with the idea of this connecting those wires together. You can use that twisty tie off the bread, or you can use a zip tie. Now we're gonna put the screw back in the trigger through the handle. It's that T9 screw. That one is a pain in the ass, just a heads up. It's just hard to see down in that handle. Got that in, we're gonna put this cover back over these wires. Run it back through this channel. Just take your time with it. You can leave that twisty tie on there to help you get it through there. I went ahead and pulled it off. Probably would have been better to leave it on till you got it through that cover. Next we're going to put the 2 screws back in the cover. It's Torx T9 screws. I'm going to put the motor back in the body. Run the wires through the channel on the motor where the circuit board is. Guess you can call that a slot. On the back of the motor where it meets the body, it's keyed where it's kind of fit in. I put my hand around the motor, kind of held it tight behind the body frame. Next we're going to bend these battery terminals back over onto the circuit board. We're going to get our 2 screws back in, our Torx T9 screws. The majority of the screws are Torx T9 except for the 4 screws that go through the body to the canister. Next we're going to get this communication cable back down, and you just push straight back down onto the circuit board. I used a pair of tweezers to line it up and pushed it down with my finger. There it is. I'm going to check it with a pair of tweezers. And I believe that's the communication for the 3 modes, the economy, medium, and boost. Next we're going to clip this cover back in over the circuit board. And here's another way you can hold it. Put your thumb over the top of it. We're going to get these 2 Torx T9 screws back in the cover to the body. Next we're going to put the canister back onto the frame. And there's a slot on the canister, there's a slot on the frame. Slide it together. I had to push the trigger in to get it to slide all the way up. Next we're going to put these 4 Phillips screws back in from the body to the canister. there's a switch on the battery that connects with the trigger. Go ahead and put the battery back in. Trigger has tension on it. Next, we're going to put these 2 screws in from the frame to the canister on the bottom in front of the handle, the Torx T9. We're going to double check our Phillips screws. We're going to go ahead and put this Torx T9 in the handle to the battery. Put these 2 Torx T9s holding the battery to the frame. Next, we're going to put the filter back on it. Turn it clockwise, lock it in. There we go.